Hello viewers, today we have with us Mr. Chris Bayliss, Deputy Secretary General of the International Aluminium Institute with us. Thank you for joining us, it's an honor.
Yeah, you're very welcome, thank you for having me.
Could you tell us more about the International Aluminium Institute?
So we're the global association for the aluminium industry, and our members are predominantly the primary aluminium producers. So all of the smelters and the upstream and the downstream here in the Gulf are members of the International Aluminium Institute. And our work is a forum for the global industry to come together to talk about issues that are pre-competitive in nature, but where they can combine their power to affect change. And historically our focus has been on data collection to understand the impact of the industry during its production processes. So that's kind of production data, but also things like energy efficiency data, sustainability data, and health and safety as well. And we use that data to do a number of different things. One is to benchmark the industry, to show areas where smelters and others can improve performance. But we also use that data to construct an understanding of the full life cycle of our products. So we know that aluminium is energy intensive, we know that it has impacts in its production. But we also know that aluminium products benefit society through lightweight vehicles, green buildings, protective packaging. And so we use the data to quantify that. So we actually have a kind of scientific basis to communicate the impacts and the benefits of our products, which are increasingly in demand around the world, but in particular in recent years in China. And that's where we've seen the biggest growth, and that's where we're looking in the future for increased membership as well of our organisation.
Like we speak about China, we're witnessing a lot of trade barrier implications, and we're yet to await the results of the 232 investigations. So how do you foresee such trade barriers for the global economy?
So look, we're a global association. And we are, our kind of founding principle is on free and fair trade. Okay, so we don't like barriers to trade. We were incorporated in 1972 on the back of the energy crises, when the industry, the primary industry, began to move from traditional producing and consuming areas in North America, Japan, Europe, to new areas of production, Australia, Brazil, here in the Gulf region. And so we're bound up in that globalization of the industry and a globally traded commodity. Okay, and the fact is that aluminium is increasingly in demand, not just in new areas, or growing areas like China, but also in traditional markets. So in the US, for instance, automotive lightweighting has really driven this growth in aluminium demand, particularly on the wrought side, on the body sheet for vehicles. And we're only going to see that continue in electric vehicles, okay? Right. So aluminium is needed around the world. Now it's got to flow from somewhere, and the places traditionally it has flowed from are places that are rich in long-term competitive energy. Okay, and that's really why the industry shifted in the 70s to these new areas. And it's to some extent why the industry is shifting today, although we'll talk about China in a moment, I guess. The truth is China produces more than half of the primary aluminium in the world. It's going to have an increasing recycling, domestically sourced recycling production as well in the future, but it also consumes it, right? It's that production in China is almost, it's not exclusively, but it's predominantly for Chinese consumption in value-added products. Potential trade barriers for me, they have the potential to impact essentially prices for downstream, for our customers.
Right.
Or for our members' customers. The cost will be passed on. And the beverage can producers, the automotive producers, they're the ones who will feel the impact. So, and it was mentioned in one of the panels yesterday that I think the panelists thought it was unlikely that there would be that there would be tariffs across the board. Correct. Because of that impact on the downstream industry. For me, it's about produce it where it makes sense to produce and get it to who needs it the most efficiently as possible. Now, there's some caveats to that, and one of those is that that kind of globally traded singular commodity of aluminium doesn't really exist as a singular commodity. it's traded in different forms, and increasingly certain market segments are asking specific qualities of the metal, and increasingly that seems like low carbon aluminium, green aluminium with a lower footprint.
Correct.
And so I think in the future we are going to see that growth in some of those demands from customers. And the truth is that China is 90% coal-fired, has a much higher footprint than metal from other areas, including here in Oman and in the GCC more widely. That's something to watch. That's an interesting thing for the future, particularly as aluminium is increasingly in demand in the future, but sources of green aluminium or low carbon aluminium are relatively constrained, limited to those with renewable energy base, and that group has been relatively flat for the last 10 years or so.
Okay, so what kind of growth potential do you see for the aluminium industry in India, with new emerging markets, coming into the picture?
So in India, look, the potential is in the demographics in India, right? I mean, it's just that kilograms per capita usage is very low compared to other regions, and a larger population, and an increasing middle class as well, and increasing GDP that will fund some of that. Some of the work that we've done recently is looking not just at consumption per capita, but is in the stock in use per capita. It's an interesting concept. When aluminium goes into long lifetime products, and that's the predominant use of aluminium in buildings or in building products, in vehicles, they're long lifetime products. If it goes in a building, it stays in a building 25, 50 years. If it goes into a car, maybe 15 years, maybe in India, even longer. And it's locked in use.
Correct.
And what we find is that GDP is a good indicator of increasing demand, but what you also need is, as societies develop, that stock grows as well. And in India, that stock in use per capita is extremely low. So there's real potential there to grow that stock in infrastructure, in particular in India, in electrification. So cabling has always been a strong market in India, but that will continue to grow. For me, it's also in mass transport. So often the discussion in Europe or North America is about aluminium's use in passenger vehicles, in cars and light trucks. But really, and that's a great story, but the real potential for economies that are transporting goods and people and services long distances with a large population is mass transport. So high-speed rail, trucks, these kind of things, and in the future as well, electric vehicles, because it's not just about the individual vehicle, it's about the system as a whole. So aluminium has potential, let's say, in the cabling, in junction boxes, in the machinery that goes into it, not just train carriages.
So when we look at sectors like transport and construction that you're talking about, the product life cycle it's huge. Can we talk about new emerging markets where the product life cycle is short?
Yes. So the interesting thing in China, and we publish some of this material, so I urge folks to go out there and take a look, is we look at lifetimes in different regions by different products, market segment. And we know that building product lifetimes in China, for instance, are much shorter than the rest of the world. So what went in Europe or the US 30 years ago is likely to stay for another 20, 30, 40 years. But what went in China 20 years ago is already coming out as scrap. That's why China is
exporting.
They've stopped importing mixed scrap, and they've cut down on the import of mixed scrap, and they're utilising domestic scrap much more. And for the much shorter lifetime products, for packaging products, for beverage cans, this is historically the flow has always been infrastructure and going into transportation, and then into beverage cans as you have a population that has disposable income. So for India, you could expect as disposable income increases, as there's more cash floating around, that people do move to increase uses of beverage cans and foils. So you would expect to see that in India in the future. Interestingly, there's a socioeconomic role for those products to play. It's not just about the demand from the market. think it's at 1/3 of food that's produced globally goes to waste. So 1/3 of the food that comes out of agricultural processes never makes it into a kind of nutritional bank for humans. So that's just lost. That's wasted energy, that's wasted water, that's wasted land.
Right.
And there you have the potential of packaging, right? That's the potential of packaging, is to save those resources, to make sure that they are kept fresh over their lifetime. And aluminium is a great barrier to odour, to light, to infection as well. So there is a role for aluminium packaging to play, particularly in India, where you have large population, large agricultural development as well. So for me, that's a big thing. It's not just about that pull from the market, it's about the potential of the material to improve the well-being of people around the world. So we have some material on that, and we produce life cycle studies to look at some of those savings in the use phase as well. And for sure, India is going to be a growing market for those solutions in the future.